Hello, and welcome to episode 44 of Webflail. I'm your host, Jack, and today my guest is Max Joles. Max is the head of dev for 8020 agency in the States, and he also writes a newsletter about Maine, where he lives, called The Maine Outsider, about a roundup of local outdoor events. He also set up Made by Adventure, a company to highlight travel as a force for good. I've never met Max, but from scrolling through his social media and website, this seems to explain two big parts of his life: his love of problem solving and the great outdoors. I think people that are good at both, working with analytical problems, and also have a love for the freedom of the outdoors, are particularly potent because they can zoom in on problems but also zoom out to have a wider perspective. We'll dig into this during the episode. The failures that Max wants to talk about today are forgetting he has a body, assuming responsibility, and taking himself too seriously. Max, welcome to the Webflow podcast.
Thank you, Jack. That was fun to have that read back to me. I feel like you see me.
It's always kind of strange when, I've met someone for the first time and I basically tell them about them, because there's not that many times in life when someone will just talk about you when you've just met them off the internet. So I'm glad that you think that that was generally pretty accurate.
Yeah, and I love that you went in completely. Yeah, you didn't run it by me before. You just made the read, wrote it up, and boom, nailed it. 10 out of 10.
That's a relief. I mean, sometimes I should check before I read someone's life back to them, frankly, because there have been times when we've had to edit quite a lot of the intro because it turns out that the stuff I've gathered off the internet is completely wrong. But I'm glad that we're on the right lines with this one.
Totally.
So your website says you support makers, you build side projects, and ask a lot of questions. And you're clearly very involved in different online communities. And so, where did this love of tinkering and making things and finding the grit in the oyster come from?
Hmm. Um. I mean, I'd like to say it was always there, but I don't. I don't think it was. I think curiosity was kind of a late blooming trait for me. Pretty much after college, I'd say. So after college, I took an untraditional route and started a travel company with a friend. And it was during that experience, I went to school for economics, environmental science. So I had no experience or background in anything entrepreneurial or startup e. Um, but just through the course of basically creating trips, marketing them, building a website, the sort of curiosity in problem solving and just seeing something, needing to do it, learning about it, solving it, getting satisfaction from it, started the feedback cycle, I guess, was a lot tighter with that. And it really encouraged me, I guess, to go out and learn. So I think the first maybe 4 or 5 years after college where my curiosity was applied in a way that was very, I guess, professional or oriented towards, skill building, problem solving, getting the business off the ground, all these things. And kind of just recently, within maybe the last 2, 3 years, it's changed quite a bit where I think because of my situation, I'm not a freelancer, I'm not grinding so much anymore. I don't feel that pressure. It's been able to go other ways in completely weird places. And I let it go that way. I go to the library and I check out. I just go to the library and I grab books that look cool to me, and I just start reading them. And if I like them, I keep reading. If I don't, I just put them away. So it's kind of like that problem solving curiosity that has a certain outlet, and certain reward that came earlier, but the curiosity for just the love of figuring out something is a new thing, and I'm kind of rolling with that a lot more lately, and finding a lot of joy in that.
It's interesting that you had like an entrepreneurial thing that kind of gave you the practical need to work things out, and then
Mm,
after, like, throughout that process, you seem to combine the outdoors, but then also actually like learning that you love problem solving and then figuring out, because there's so many different parts to building a business, like
mm.
acquiring customers, communicating clearly with them and stuff. And I guess that really led itself nicely into freelancing, and later now your role as head of ops at 8020.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anytime you're put in that freelance situation or an entrepreneurial space, it's totally self-directed by nature, right? Because you are the person who creates the movement, and you are the person who's responsible for making things happen, and you are the person responsible for learning what you don't know. And I think when I got in that place for the first time after college, it was a new experience, and I it took a minute to adjust to it. But again, the feedback of, and it's different than college where, or school, where someone might say, write an essay on this topic. There's really not a lot of um, nurturing of, I guess, what do you want to write about? What do you find interesting? And when you get in like a freelance role or some sort of role where you go out and you have to understand things, like what does it mean to do marketing? What does that entail? What are the different ways to market? Whatever the question is, it's different when it comes from you and you have a chance to go find that information rather than a person telling you, I need you to do this. So yeah, just unlock something different. And if you can, I guess, like embody that mindset uh, and practice it and actually view it as a skill set, similar probably to how you have thought about interviewing guests. Um, if you can think about asking questions and actually be aware of the questions you're asking, it'll just take you places that I think are unexpected.
Mm. And something that's on your website as well is that you seem to really highlight is asking a lot of questions.
Mm,
That seems to be one thing that um, I've noticed when you're working with someone who's a freelancer who maybe doesn't have as much experience. They don't ask as many questions because they're worried that by asking questions,
mm,
they're basically showing that they don't have the answers when they
mm,
think that they should.
yeah.
Whereas you're, as someone who's pretty experienced, head of ops at 80/20,
Hmm.
you say, I ask loads and loads of questions. And I think
Mm.
it's interesting how you highlight the fact that you don't have the answers and you are trying to discover them by asking so many questions. Do you think that's a really important part of your success as a freelancer in Webflow?
Yeah, totally. I would say it's not just about the quantity of questions. I really would say it's an art form, um, and it's something that I think people don't pay much attention to.
Mm,
Um, and not something I was again ever taught or exposed to is the idea of basically the type of questions you ask change the trajectory of where you're headed. So like in whatever environment you're in, especially collaborative environments, whether it's a sales call, a technical call, a call with your team, a call if you're a manager, however you cadence those questions in the order you ask them will dictate where the conversation goes. So if on a sales call you only focus on the nitty gritty and you just blast technical questions, that's not the right approach. You have to think before you go into those environments, what am I trying to get from that? And what type of questions might lead me there? And then obviously there's a bit of improv to it too, where, you can't always know what you need to ask. So you have to be in the moment, you have to listen, you just have to follow up. Um, but yeah, totally. It's a really helpful skill and it makes people feel seen. Um,
mm,
I was actually thinking about this morning where the failure we'll talk about later. I actually reread the old emails with the client I had an issue with and fired. And um, clients get nervous when you are quiet and you don't tell them things or you leave them in the dark. And one of the easiest ways you can make them not feel that way is to just show up with questions and be curious and make sure you're giving them a chance to voice what they want to say. And then on the super next level is if you have the ability to ask questions that provoke them to think a way they haven't thought before, even if you're not sharing new information, um, you're not telling them what to do, but you're just causing them to think about something slightly differently, then your level is even higher. But even if you just show up and you ask good questions and you make an honest attempt to understand what they're trying to do, that will make you authoritative in a way you're not actually projecting as an authority.
huh, that's fascinating. There's what you just said reminds me of I don't know if this is just Christo who said this, but I've heard Christo talk about this. I feel like I talk about Christo more than I talk
Mm.
about my own mum on this podcast. It's really weird. Anyway, he talks about how what questions are the least valuable questions,
Mm.
whereas why questions are the most valuable.
Mm.
So there's kind of questions that lead to quite closed answers, and they might be more like technical questions, like how many pages do you want for your website rebuild or whatever.
Mm.
And then there's why questions that are more valuable, like you said that this is your goal. Why is this the primary objective for the website rebuild or something like that?
Mm. Yeah.
Which instantly changes, like you just mentioned there, the perspective of the client, of how you're changing how the client might see their own version of reality. And I think
Mm.
that's a really, really powerful kind of framework to think about when you're asking questions to clients. Do you agree with that? And does that resonate?
Yeah, totally. Again, on the idea of, a cadence of questions or how you order them and the type of questions, there are different questions that lead to different responses. And to your point, like there's a time and place for what questions. Um, so as a specific example, if I'm working with a client on a big migration, in the early phases, we'll be talking about why questions, which are the things you talked about, which is, what are the motivations here? um, you know, these are what I'm saying them as what questions. They're starting with what, but they're really why. It's like the motivation or the reason behind it. It might be uh, like, what do you hope to gain from moving? What would an ideal scenario look like? Those type of questions open it up to a bigger thing. Why you're moving is kind of the why part of that. But then there's the real tactical what questions, which come later, which might be, what does this technology do? If I'm auditing the marketing scripts or the integrations on their site, then I'm just hammering through what questions. And it's not about exploring something deeper or trying to understand a deeper meaning. It's purely just information exchange. And the question is just the way to get that information out of them into me. Um, so yeah, and I think what you said, you talked about like a question about something. I don't know what you said, but a question about like the client's motivations or their business goals or whatever. Another thing about questions is they're gentler. So if you're having a client uh, ask you for something, or there's scope creep or whatever, and you've had those why questions earlier where you've identified um, what are the motivations, what are the big business objectives, whatever that is, and all of a sudden they're asking you to do something, rather than pushing back and being like, this isn't in scope. And a more gentle way to do this is like, hey, do you think this, how do you think this relates to the main goal you set in step one? And it's such a nice way to flip it, where you're not just forcing, resistance. You're opening it up to them to consider. Now maybe they come back and they try to play you, and then you're in some sort of weird question interview or interrogation in mode. But I that's not my experience. It's better to kind of open it up to them, and you're shining the light on it without spotlighting them in the eyes, I guess. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, and I can imagine you must feel a bit like Yoda or,
Mm.
a Buddha or something when you say, "But let's look at the first stage where we talked about," it's like a
Yeah.
really kind of clever way of them
Socratic.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very old school.
Um, yeah, no, it's really powerful. But I do think that, thinking about how we ask questions, the order at which we ask questions, and the general process of guiding a client through is something that actually isn't talked enough about in the Webflow
Mm.
space, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of um, conversation on how to build a website, but that's a very different conversation to how to
Mm.
build a website for someone else.
Mm.
And I'm really intrigued to, yeah, look into that more. I think that's something that personally I need to work on a lot. So it's really interesting to hear your insights there.
Yeah, nice.
Speaking of curating ideas,
Mm.
you have your newsletter, and I'm very intrigued about how because you've got a lot of kind of marketing background, and
Hmm.
it seems that your newsletter kind of scratches that itch, and it seems to be like something that combines the outdoors with, thinking about the customer and thinking about, your local area as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that plays into your life?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, the premise of the newsletter is I just keep track of a lot of outdoor clubs, outdoor organizations, conservation groups in the state, which is a lot of work, as you can imagine. I think I am subscribed to like close to 300 newsletters with hundreds of organizations databased.
Wow.
And uh, I do this because this is just what I naturally do. I don't naturally follow 300 newsletters, but I'm just naturally really interested in what's happening in my state,
Mm.
because it's something that matters to me. I think being outdoors is really good for you. I find a lot of joy in it. Um, I think having a healthy respect for nature, just being outside is really good. And so I do it naturally. And I just had this thought one day where it was basically like, if I'm going to do this, uh, and I have a lot more, I guess, knowledge about it than say some of my friends here, which is normal because I'm doing that much. But why don't I just share this, and see if anyone's else's would find value in this. Um, and yeah, so I have a lot of skills related to no code after all these years. So there's a whole crazy backend that happens with all sorts of automations and hacks and whatever. And that allowed me to do it really efficiently. So I'm able to do it in a few hours a week, read all this stuff, throw it in a newsletter, make it look pretty. Um, forget what the original question was, but
Well,
um,
I mean, like, it's cool that you're still combining your love of
oh
nature and like marketing alongside your job. Like, you've got kind of
yeah,
you've managed to still keep that as a big part of your life, which I think is really nice.
yeah. That's one thing I'm constantly curious about or interested in is basically I think there's you have apps, and
Mm.
we have Airtable, we have Webflow, and so much of the time we talk about the app, but then you have application, which is how something is used, and that to me is so interesting, and that's really what's exciting about the tools. It's not necessarily the tools in themselves that are exciting. It's what the tools can do for people, or how the tools are applied, how the apps are applied. And being able to do this on the side is really fun because when you are applying your skills or the tools you love using to something you're interested in or are curious about, it's just like magical. It all flows so easily. At least this project has, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. You know, every once in a while, I'll write. I'm probably 8 newsletters deep at this point, and each week I have like a little list of things I see as potential improvements. So one week it was, I'm sending out this list of events and I'm naming where in the state the event is taking place and as part of the link. But then I realized like not everyone reading this has a map of Maine in their head and can immediately picture where all these locations are and figure out in their head how long will it take me to get there. So it's like, oh, maybe I should just create a little automation that when I put in the location, it goes to the Google Maps API, creates a static image showing a pinpoint of where that is, and pops it into the email. Little things like that. It's applying your skills in in the conditions where it just feels fun and natural is really cool.
And I think that's something to really like draw out as a point for anyone that's listening who's maybe starting out with Webflow, because I think sometimes people seem to get into the space because they're like, wow, Brett from Design Joy is making tons of
Mm,
money doing this.
mm,
Like, I want to do that. Like, it's kind of like it's less about the process, but more about the result.
mm,
And just I think when you get good at tools is when you just play and you just explore because you're just playing for the sake of playing and you're just following your nose. And there's people like Glenn McWhinney,
mm.
who made No Code Kids, and he now is like memberships expert
Yeah.
just because he's enjoyed playing with that, and vice versa with you. You've made something that you personally just wanted to make because you wanted to make it and you thought it would help people, and I think that's a really, really powerful thing for any listeners who are like, oh, I don't know what I should put on my portfolio. Make something that you want to see in the world. I think it's just such a powerful thing to explore.
Yeah. I listened to Connor's episode on here, and it sounds like that was kind of his journey as well with the Unicorn Factory. It's just the thing he wanted to build and try making, and in the process, obviously, he's become very good at it. But yeah, having an application to the tool that matters to you, or at least is intriguing in some way, will carry you along a lot more than basically trying to put yourself through someone else's curriculum.
100%. And also, you're going to get good at a tool so that if you were to choose freelancing or you were to join an agency, you can actually make and do the stuff because you've already kind of played with it and tested it. So I think it's really, really powerful. Okay, I want to get into your failures now. We've got a meaty episode ahead because you have put a lot of thought into these, and I'm excited to get into them. So tell me about your first failure, forgetting you have a body.
I had to put it that way because it's so dramatic.
Yeah, it's epic.
But in some ways it feels true. And essentially what it is when you work online and you love what you do, or what you do is engaging to you, and you work remotely and you work from home, there is a serious risk that you'll get so drawn into the digital world or your digital life that you forget a physical world exists and you live in a physical body. And I had that happen to me, where, I'm sure a lot of people, kind of during COVID, working 80/20, working on some big projects, I just lost track of the fact that I existed in like a young, healthy body that could do crazy stuff because I was so mentally locked into what I was doing. Maybe one day I'm working on a project that involves coding, and I just get sucked into that thing. And end of the day comes and it's night, and I'm like, wow, I haven't moved. I haven't gone outside. And I say that because I think it has actual risks. I actually developed knee pain from basically being inactive. And I had to go to physical therapy, and I had to try to kind of essentially build my muscles back up because your body atrophies when you sit in a chair all day. So that's the extreme version of it. Or the negative side of it is just like, don't forget like that you kind of have one life on the earth. And while there's a lot of stuff happening online and it feels important, and sometimes it is really important to your career and to whatever, I would remind people that your body is pretty amazing too, and to go outside and do stuff. Because in the worst case scenario, that type of thing can happen. Just take care of yourself, I guess. But the positive side of it, or the other side, is I was in a slump earlier this year, where I wasn't focused, like I was describing. I wasn't getting sucked in. In fact, it was more like I was sitting at my computer and I felt consistently distracted. And when I'm in those spaces, sometimes my inclination is just to keep trying. Like, okay, you didn't get what you said done in the first 4 hours of the day. Power through. But then all of a sudden I'm on Twitter, I'm here, and you're just not locked in. And one day I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start taking an afternoon walk without a destination. And I'm just gonna start cruising. And I did that, and my mood improved so dramatically over the course of the next few weeks, and my ability to focus and my just general well-being and happiness, I guess, improved so much. Literally just walking around my neighborhood and just finding things I hadn't seen before, whatever. So I think the connection between your body and your mental health and your ability to perform at your job, if it's digital, is bigger than I realized. So that's really it, is just remembering that I have a body that I should take care of, and that taking care of it and using it and being out in the world and being physical actually has positive benefits for the work I'm doing when I'm sitting down at the computer. So it's really just a balance thing, I guess.
That is the craziest situation, though, that you had to go to like physical therapy because you were sat down so much and your muscles were atrophying.
So what are you in? What are you in for, buddy? Skiing accident?
Yeah, exactly.
Running?
Yeah.
No, I've just been sitting a lot. Thanks.
I've been sitting on my ass too long. That's my problem. It's
Yeah.
great. Like but as much as like we're laughing about it, it's not something that's trivialized because I think probably a lot of people that listen to Webflow. In fact, I bet you're listening to this sat on your ass right now, whoever's listening. So maybe, yeah, go for a walk or whatever. I've noticed that when I go to the co-working space, I go to a co-working space that's really close. I cycle there in the morning.
Mm,
And my day is so much more productive. The cycle is 10 minutes. I mean,
mm.
I'm pegging it, so it's good exercise, but it's literally only 10 minutes and it makes a world of difference to the work I'm doing. Um, and also, the other thing that I've been doing when I haven't been going to the co-working space because it's raining or whatever is just walking to the boulangerie. I'm living in
Mm.
Bordeaux. For anyone that's like, "What the hell is he talking about?" Just the act of going there, getting some bread, and walking back just instantly sets you up the for the day in a completely different way than you would in a regular routine when you just do a big weekly shop and just be at home, maybe
Yeah.
working if you're a freelancer. So I really resonate with that. It's so simple, but it's so not. I think it's so simple that it's overlooked. Like a lot of some of the most simple things in life.
Mm.
So what you now do is you go for a walk every day. Is that just? It's as simple as that. Is that the only kind of change that you've had in your life as a result of this?
I do a number of things now. I mean, but the basic idea is just at some point in my day, probably, for me, it's usually in the afternoon. My natural energy, I guess, kind of crashes, and I normally get distracted or sort of lose focus. So it's just a good time rather than again trying to sit at the computer and continue powering through whatever. I'll just do something.
Mm,
I go to a rock climbing gym. I'll go for a bike ride. Go for a walk. Um, doesn't really matter. And sometimes I'll do it at the end of the workday. Sometimes I'll do it kind of before the workday. Or sorry, before the end of the workday, and maybe I'll come back and all of a sudden, like things have simmered down. Like exercising brings me down a bit into a more calm space. So some of those remaining to-do list items or whatever, that thing I couldn't figure out, or the bit of debugging with code or whatever it is, like it just feels a little less intimidating
stressful.
and
Mm.
stressful. Like it just has a way of building up over the day. But if you leave it, burn off some steam, I guess, and come back, it seems to help a bit.
There's something else that you said there when you were talking about the initial failure that sometimes when you're not quite in the zone, maybe because you haven't done any exercise for whatever reason, you're just like, okay, I've got to push now. When
Mm,
actually, sometimes that's exactly the time when you shouldn't push. And that's
yeah,
exactly the time when your body's maybe saying, look, you've been dossing around for an hour. It's not like you can just suddenly push. Like you're dossing around because, maybe like you're just distracted because you haven't actually just gone for a walk or just had a complete um body movement change from just sitting in your chair. So I think that's another thing to kind of take note
mm,
of.
totally.
So we've got a very simple but important first failure there. Just move your body a little bit more. Something that Matthew McConaughey does. I've been reading his book Green Lights,
Mm,
which is quite a weird book, if I'm honest. But I mean, Matthew McConaughey,
yeah,
he's an interesting character. But he does 20 press ups, like in
mm,
he'll just drop down and do 20 press ups like during the day. And by the end of the day, he's done 200 press ups because he's just like on a film set, does
yeah,
his press ups, and he's done that for years.
yeah,
And look at him go, right?
yeah,
So just putting that out there. If you
yeah.
guys are in a bit of a slump, just do 20 press ups if you can. I mean, I actually tried doing this the other day after reading this book, and it's pretty hard
Yeah,
just to do 20 off the bat if you haven't done them for a year or two
yeah.
or three.
And there's something valuable there, which is uh, it doesn't have to be a long time. It doesn't have to be complicated. Um, I think I think there's something, and it's not just, I guess, exercise that I'm talking about. It's just about getting your body in the world in some way. And a lot of times you can do things that you may we may be talking about in the context of exercise or your physical experience, but it's also good time for mental work.
Mm.
So you can kill many birds with one stone by doing a certain sort of thing. Like it might be the healthiest thing you might do during the middle of your day when you're feeling scrambled or things are frustrating is to take like a journal and go for a walk for 10 minutes, find a bench, write down a few things, get some clarity or whatever. We think that the internet or being online is the most productive space to do work related to online work. But there are other spaces and other ways where I think are better, just a better environment. So a lot of times now I'll actually just go to a coffee shop without internet if I'm doing something related to say strategy, writing. If I'm thinking about something that doesn't require me to be in Webflow or whatever tool I'm using, my tendency is to still be at my computer in my normal environment. But now I actually separate from that. And I'll walk to a coffee shop with a pen and paper. No chance of distractions. Gives me that interaction with other people, uh, and I do better work there. That type of work. So I guess it's like don't assume that by taking a break, it's not necessarily productive. Like the goal is not always to be productive, but sometimes the breaks you're taking or the things you're doing physically actually really help when you sit back at your computer. So it's you're not slacking off. It's needed.
So if anyone's got an agency boss and you just say, look, guys, Max just told me to go for a walk, but trust me, it's
I'm bringing a
productive.
notebook. Yeah.
I know you want the website done by midday, but I'm working on
Uh,
it in my head, okay?
yeah.
Yeah. No, but jokes aside, very important advice there. So thanks for sharing.
hmm
Tell me about failure number 2, assuming responsibility.
Hmm. I realized when I wrote this one that I think the way I labeled it isn't actually what I was thinking. But what I really meant is not assigning responsibility, clearly. Specifically in the beginning of a project. And this project was in the early days of my freelance career. And it was with a person who I'd actually known for a while and was kind of like a mentor advisor, was doing things that I thought were really, really cool. At one point he had talked about investing in our travel company. And I made the mistake of kind of doing the buddy buddy thing where it's like you start a project, like I got you, like trust me, I got you, which is such a dangerous position to start from because what do you have? What are you promising? And the lesson was basically I didn't have that conversation, where now when I write up agreements early on or have early conversations, it's very clear. It's 2 columns. Here's what I'll be doing. Here's what you'll be doing. And maybe if you want to even go more explicit, it's 4 columns. Here's what I'll be doing. Here's what I'll not be doing. And the things I'm not doing, either you're doing or you need to hire someone else to do, or I need to hire someone else to do. But I started that project with a just uh, don't worry, I'll make it work for you. And you can guess how that went. All of a sudden, there were conversations about copywriting and graphic design, and that was not my strong suit. And for a while, I went and tried. Uh, resentment just kind of builds over time, especially when you're early in your freelance career and the projects matter so much in the sense of just income, what it means for your portfolio. Uh, so it basically really stressed me out, and I didn't have the I don't know, awareness or confidence at that point to put a pause on that project and just have a difficult conversation. Hey man, here's my situation. I know I said I would do this thing, but I'm not skilled enough to do that. I don't know, whatever, it would have taken to have that conversation. I'm sure he would have respected it. We could have, if we had to rewrite an agreement, change the scope, who knows? I didn't do that. I let it snowball. Uh, and eventually I just got so frustrated and just sent a bunch of emails basically saying like, this project is going downhill. Like I didn't blame him. I tried to kind of take the blame, but never really never really made an attempt to have an honest conversation and resolve it, and ended up just basically quitting the project over email. which sucked. And yeah, it was very early freelance experience, kind of scarring, but in a way really helpful. Um, because now when I saw what can happen when you don't have the conversations early and you aren't open about responsibilities, even though maybe it might seem like, I don't know, you're being too forward or you're trying to, I don't know, not do the work or something. It's so much better to just be clear about what you will do, what you expect of the person you're working with, what they expect of you. And I did not do that. And yeah, it sucked, plain and simple.
Mm. Okay, a lot to unpack there, and I think really, really powerful story for people to potentially like learn from as well. So you essentially worked with someone that you knew really well, but working with someone that you know really well versus just knowing them really well is a
Mm,
completely different thing. And you didn't set expectations for what you were going to do and for what they were going to do.
hmm
And as a result, you kind of said, I'll just do everything, I guess, then. And then you got resentful and bitter, but didn't have maybe the emotional maturity or confidence to actually just say, look, here's what I said I would do. And I can't actually fulfill the things that
mm,
I originally said. So either we change the scope or you find someone else to fulfill this part of the project, like the graphic design, but something's got to change. But instead, you were like, you know what, man, this isn't working, and I'm sorry, but have a good life. Was that kind of how? Is that a
yeah.
fair summary?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically just like a pretty immature communication and relationship on my end, uh, due to lack of experience. And again, like when you don't ever talk about what expectations are, or you don't do it kind of explicitly at the beginning, then you're just assuming. And in my head, I'm assuming, he's the expert. Surely he'll be creating the content. And he's probably assuming like he's the expert. Surely he'll be helping me put together the content. And so we're both assuming the other party is doing something and we're asking them under that assumption. And to be on
Mm,
the opposite end of to have someone assume you're going to do something without ever talking about it feels like you're being used. But
mm,
to assume someone will do something because you've never talked about it is also kind of just naive in a sense, where that may have been his perception. Uh, and so starting from that place of way too many assumptions and then not having the whatever it was, the directness, the confidence to have that conversation in the middle where there was a chance to course correct and then to just let it play out over the course of whatever it was, 2 months, and eventually let the resentment build and the burnout and the kind of immature firing. Uh, yeah, not the way to do it.
yeah. So, I mean, things that seem to be quite important takeaways there is that have the difficult conversations as early as possible.
Mm.
Seems to be something that um, it seems to be something that you've learned from this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that just popped in my head is maybe you're not a bad person if you say no, and you're not less skilled if you say I can't do that. That's a mistake I see people making fairly often. Is now that I'm at this point in my career where I work with more contractors and I am in a position more of hiring than being hired, it scares me when I see a person say yes to something that I can feel they're not into. Uh, that or yeah, there's that thing where be pretty like be aware of what you're really good at and what you have bandwidth for and what is sustainable to you. Um, and if you say no, that's okay. And you can maybe come up with an alternative. You can, so actually the project after that was another client. And I learned from that mistake. And the client we were building a membership site and they needed to log basically, it was like a course. So they needed to log some data about completion of videos in the membership data layer for the plugin. And at that point, I didn't know JavaScript. So I couldn't really do that. And I was really tempted to just be like, yeah, no problem. Like we'll figure it out or whatever. But I stopped and I said, hey guys, I actually don't know how to do this. But what I can do is like I can go out and I can find someone in the community. I'm pretty well connected. I can find someone who can build this thing. I'll see what it costs and I'll get back to you in 3 days or whatever. No problem. I found someone. They gave me a quote. We talked about it. I went back to the client. I said, here's what the situation is. Is this something you want? Is this, is this big enough need for the project? And they're like, yep, let's do it. And we did that. And it worked really smoothly. So yeah, sometimes that's a very obvious case where I didn't code. How would I pretend to code? But there's a lot more gray areas, I guess, where maybe you're a developer who's being asked to design a lot of stuff that you're not really, maybe it could be considered part of dev, but all of a sudden a frequent one I see is like, I need a filterable directory. Well, designing like a filterable directory has a lot of design decisions built into it. And it's kind of a difficult UI to really nail. And the client's just going to keep asking like, what happens when it's empty, or can you do this thing, or can you stack different categories? And a lot of times that gets messy quickly if you're a person who's more of a dev who's being asked to like, well, what happens on mobile? What do all the filters look like on mobile? So it's not always as clear as I don't know or I do know, but it isn't always a bad thing to just be more open about what you think you're capable of delivering.
God, I wish we did this podcast a few weeks ago. I really needed some of this advice. So, okay, gold dust. We need to just lock all this gold dust down. So we've got have difficult conversations as early as possible to avoid resentment building up. Some people get silent angry, and you might not even know that person is angry with you if they're silent. Now think about that from a client's perspective. If you're pissed off at a client, then work out how to explain that to them, and also, say, okay, this is frustrating me because, and here's how I suggest we can change this to course correct, or something. Don't just say, I'm pissed off at you. Okay. I want to have a difficult conversation. I'm annoyed with you. Just explain why it's frustrating and how it can benefit you both to change in a different direction. This is something that I've had recently and I messed it up, and I just, I wish I could have changed it. But have the difficult conversations earlier than you think. Just if something's annoying you, talk about it early. Say no more. There's nothing wrong with saying no to things that you cannot do. It is way worse, in my experience. Again, last few weeks, don't say yes and be like, I'm going to work it out. If it's difficult, it's going to take you a long time to even work out something enough to get an MVP, let alone something that is actually what the client wants. Nothing wrong with saying no, because when you say no, what you're saying is yes to other stuff that you're actually good at. Okay? It's so obvious, but really just take a second. If a client says, hey, can you do this? Instead of just being like, yeah, I'll sort it. Yeah, don't worry. Just take a second. Remember this podcast episode. Listen to Max. Just take a breath and just consider it. Say, I'll get back to you, or whatever if you need more time, but don't just say yes blindly. And then the final thing that you talked about there is, if you do say no, you've got an amazing Webflow network by virtue of just being a Webflower. Like, there are people who are better than you at particular stuff that you can reach out to, and you can, get support on. And don't be afraid of saying, I don't know how to do this, but I know someone who does, because at least you're providing a result for the client that, frankly, may cost them a little bit more money, but it's the actual result that they want. Was that a fair summary? Did I leave anything out?
No, I think you nailed it. I think the simple thing right there is just, you don't have to say yes immediately, is maybe how to revise it. And you don't have to say no immediately either. You can give yourself a chance to understand the situation, and then you can provide that context to a client. And amazingly, sometimes once the client has the context, the request will just disappear, especially if it involves money. Then all of a sudden it's not that important. But if you on the spot immediately say, yeah, I think I can do that for you, then you've committed yourself to everything that might entail, whether or not the client even cares that much about the feature. People have ideas. They don't always know what it takes to bring an idea to life.
Yeah. And if the client says anything along the lines of, this shouldn't take long to do,
Mm.
well, then why don't you do it? Why don't you do it then?
Yeah,
So yeah, if that phrase comes into the mixer, red
truth.
flag. Yeah, I feel that's always one that gets the hairs on the back of my neck. You know, like a hedgehog goes into a ball when it's ready to attack. That's me.
It's a spidey sense.
Yeah. Um, but anyway, really important points made there, and I think realizing that you don't have unlimited time. You need to value your time for things that you are actually able to do well and proficiently in order for your client to get the result that they need. Like, you're not actually helping your client by saying yes blindly. You think
Mm.
you are, because you're like, yes, that's what I'm taught to say at school. I'm always meant to be, someone that says yes, and I can do
Mm.
this, and I'm going to have a go, and just have a go. These kind of phrases that you hear in your childhood and upbringing and stuff, and then you apply them into your adult life. And guess what? Those same rules are not applying in the same context. Like, you need to just think, is this actually helpful for my client if I try and just wing this?
Mm.
Probably not. Probably not, guys. Sorry, I'm getting really passionate about this because this is something that has come up for me recently, and I wish I took heed of your advice. Well, I mean, I didn't hear
Yeah.
about this advice early enough, but
Yeah.
just saying.
Is this a video podcast or audio only?
I mean, we're recording the video,
Yeah.
so yeah. Why?
Because
Are you just
they will
like,
see no, they will see you being animated in that moment.
I,
Maybe a little
yeah.
sweat dripping down your face too.
Oh man, I'm sweating. I'm sweating just talking about this. I think yeah, since being in France and I went to Italy
Mm.
recently, I've got more into my body language.
Nice.
I've suddenly thrown the jazz hands out there when I
I like
talk.
it.
Um well, yeah, I don't know if it's an ideal thing to just do generally. Like, when I talk to my
Mm.
family now, they're like,
Mm.
"What are you stop dancing?" Anyway,
Uh,
let's talk about failure number 3. So, taking yourself too seriously. Let's talk about that.
yeah. What's the story here? Like, I think there's just I have a little more breathing room now. You know, I would put it this way. I think starting a freelance career is tough, and you feel like you're constantly trying to prove something, or maybe constantly trying to make yourself appear big. Um, and I think that's normal. So I don't know if this comment comes more from a place of being at a point of more confidence and being able to relax a bit. And I don't know how hold it would how true it would hold if I were to put myself back in those days and try again. But essentially, I think I felt like I always had to present, and I had to run a meeting a certain way. I had to be knowledgeable. I had to be serious. The that being serious would let them know that I'm serious or I'm good at what I do. Um, and working at 80/20 has changed that a bit. Um, because here's what I realized: we had a really difficult project with a client, and they had about 12 people on their team, and hot, tight deadline, difficult situation. Every week I would meet with them for about 8 weeks straight, and we'd go through, in this case, a part of their migration. We would cover, say, 3 CMS collections per week. We talk about the complexities and differences of it, as kind of a way to try to get the project back on track, because honestly, it was going off track. People were stressed. There were messages going about like, just working. Um, and the first meeting I joined, and I was pretty serious. I was very buttoned up. Here's what we're going to do. And the meeting went well, and we got stuff done. But then the next meeting, I showed up, and for whatever reason, I was like, I had this realization, like, these are people too, and this is not their whole world. They have kids, they have lives, and we're making it seem like this is the most serious event in the history of whatever. And yeah, it's important. I'm not discounting that it didn't matter to them or whatever, but bringing context to it and like a levity or lightness to it. I started cracking jokes. I started, a little banter at the beginning of the meetings, and it just softened up. And I was getting messages after, like, 5 weeks into these meetings, I'm getting DMs from various people on the team, be like, "Thank you so much for like always cracking jokes and having fun with it." Like, it really makes the meetings that much better. It makes our lives that much better. Um, and I see it with 80/20 team members as well. I think I tweeted about it, but basically, I think the 80/20 secret sauce is competence and kindness combined, and we rely heavily on kindness. And that can look a number of different ways, but it can just be. I think one thing we do is we always initiate a conversation from a human perspective, meaning if it's a new conversation, a new person, we don't just hit them with action items. There's some indication that, like, I see you're a human, I care who you are. We send amazing client gifts because we really get to know our clients. Uh, we drop little nuggets in our Slack messages. Like, we might put an emoji that relates to what their business does. Like, it sounds kind of stupid, but um, we try to basically have fun with clients, because being playful or having fun or cracking a joke doesn't make your output less quality. So if you're competent and you can deliver, like, think about not only just being a competent, skilled person, but also think about the experience you're creating in the interaction you're having with that person. Because there's a potential to not only have it be efficient, which is a good thing, and productive, which is a good thing, but there's actually, I think, potential for it to be fun, enjoyable. Like, there are all these other qualities to a relationship, a working relationship also, that could exist. But if you only focus on, like, how do I make myself as professional and efficient and serious and whatever, like, you might miss some of those other intangibles that will give you more leeway later when you need to have a conversation with a client that's maybe tough. If you've built up a relationship that matters, you can have that conversation more easily. So it's a superpower if you have the competence, and then you can start infusing personality, or um, like going off script a bit, can make it a little bit more fun.
Mm. It's funny how simple, maybe putting like an emoji related to the client's business is, or
Yeah,
putting a meme in the chat, or whatever it is, how basic that is. And maybe people might think, well, that's unprofessional, isn't it? Or whatever. But
yeah,
actually, it's like, these people are human. You know, we find stuff funny. We want to enjoy ourselves, even if something maybe is, you know, higher stakes,
yeah,
or a higher stakes part of life. And it's funny how those little things, those human elements that, just maybe take a tiny bit more effort from you, but really not much, can completely change how that client relates to you. And I think also it's interesting that you talked about how the clients after those meetings would like DM you, just say, "Hey, I really enjoyed that. Thanks so much for like just making this a little bit easier than it would be if it was really dry."
mhm,
Um, because sometimes it feels, I've been working with people where it feels like us versus them. It's
mm,
like, yes, I'm trying to fulfill your client project, but it's like a battle. And I think it doesn't need to be if you can frame it in the right manner as someone that's competent and kind, like you've just mentioned.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, really powerful.
yeah. And obviously, it's totally dependent on, and it's not always going to feel fun and like natural. Some clients may be in a certain headspace, or they may not, whatever. But um, I don't know. If you think about what type of meetings you want to attend and what type of people you want to interact with, then I think that, or if you think back on who you like talking to, who you like working with, I think it'll pretty much become clear, like, what the qualities are that you could infuse in, or even, the conversations you listen to online, the people who, whatever it is, like, it's not the people who are very dry and serious all the time. There's probably an element of irreverence or like humor or something. So yeah, try it out, see what happens.
Yeah. I think there's something interesting that you said there where you talked about if you have the competence, then
Yes.
like you can't just be like a joker
Yes.
who's winging it. And I think that's
Yep.
that's something to highlight, because people who might be listening to this might be in their first year of freelancing and be like, I'm just going to crack a joke when we're doing a CMS migration that I've never
Welcome
done
to my
before.
stand-up hour. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to say that, there is too far there,
Yep.
and I've been there, guys. So I'm just highlighting that for anyone who's like, all right, we got a meeting tomorrow. I'm gonna, wear a funny hat or something. Like
Yeah.
there's a line, and but I do agree that most of the time we're trying to look as the way we think we're meant to look in order to be described as professional or competent or whatever those words might conjure up as images in your mind. And actually, there's nothing wrong with being human while being competent. Like, it's not competence versus kindness and human. It's actually competence and being
Yes.
kind and human.
It's definitely an and combination. Yeah, you will not have a good time if you are a funny person who doesn't deliver.
Can I get an amen? Couldn't agree more. Yes, no, the competence is that's the kind of nuts and bolts, the meat and potato, as the like very English phrase would be. And then the gravy is the kindness. Remember that, guys.
Yep.
Max, do you have anything to add on these failures, or any kind of last nuggets that you want to give us before I ask you the final question?
I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well.
I think you smashed it.
Thanks. Yeah.
But we've got a very difficult last question to finish on, though. Are you ready?
Sure.
What is your next failure going to be?
Okay. I'm going to go a little philosophical here. I have this concept in my head that I use to describe myself. I say there are two parts of me. There's a schemer and there's a dreamer. The schemer part of me is the person who looks at the situation or the environment or the game. Specifically, I use the word game. And the schemer just wants to win and will do whatever it takes, whatever tactic, whatever it takes to win the game. And then the dreamer side is the person who is attached to something bigger, or doesn't even view it as a game necessarily. Acts out of curiosity, love, whatever those qualities are. Those things work super well together when I have the schemer being led by the dreamer. But the schemer side of my brain is that problem solving side, the tinker that you see online. And that side of my brain can get hijacked really quickly when someone comes to me with a problem or a client comes to me with a need. If I let that part of me lead and I just say, yeah, I got you, I sometimes end up doing stuff I don't care about at all. So I could see myself, I've done this repeatedly where I'll end up working with a client simply because the technical challenge or like the details of the project, I could win. Like, okay, I can make a bunch of money in a short amount of time, or I know how to hack this. I can do this thing using this tool, using this script to get this information to give them this advantage. And then that project ends. I don't really think about it again. Doesn't mean much to me, and life goes on. So that's I guess a repeat risk for me, is just getting drawn into solving something or winning a game that I don't even care about.
Oosh. I think that's probably one of the best final answer questions. Did you think about that before?
I did think about it.
Okay.
I've thought about this concept quite a lot. And I heard your interviews in the past where you ask people these questions, and it doesn't. It didn't. Yeah, I have thought about it as a simple term for the simple answer, I guess.
That's a fascinating answer. I feel like that's a whole episode in itself. I guess.
Speaking of therapy,
What? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what drives you, and how do you want to spend your time is kind of the crux of that.
Yeah.
And making sure that you don't do things for the wrong reasons. Max, you've been a pleasure on the podcast. If anyone wants to ask any questions about this episode, where should they find you?
Probably just Twitter, at Max Joles, I believe. Yeah, at Max Joles. And then I do have my website, maxjoles.com, which obviously has a contact form or whatever. So feel free to email me there. But yeah, Twitter's fine. Email's fine.
Awesome. Go sign up to the Maine Outdoor newsletter if you want to know everything about the outdoors in Maine, which I'm sure everyone.
Yeah, and if you're hear this and you do live in Maine, definitely subscribe and hit me up.
And if you don't, I'll be subscribing, and I'm in France, so you guys have got no excuse.
Yeah, you're gonna know a lot about what's going on here. You'll never attend, but you'll know. Maybe you will. Who knows?
Hey, who knows? I mean, Webflail Live to discuss the depths of your schema being led by a dreamer. Max, you've been an honor to have on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you, Jack. That was awesome.